Thank you very much for joining us. With the federal government's legalization of cannabis now only 3 weeks away, today we want to provide you with an update on the legislative and regulatory framework our government intends to introduce to ensure that Ontario is ready following October 17th. Last month, Minister Fedeli and I shared details about our government's plan, a plan which has, at its foundation, a non-negotiable commitment to social responsibility. We will protect youth and take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that cannabis remains out of the hands of people under the age of 19. We will protect our roads and ensure that our police are ready to enforce a strict prohibition against drug-impaired driving. Nous protégerons nos routes et veillerons à ce que notre police soit prête pour appliquer l'interdiction rigoureuse de conduire avec faculté affaiblie par la drogue. We will continue to work with our mental health and addictions experts to ensure the public are informed of the serious health risks of recreational drug use. Nous poursuivrons notre collaboration avec nos experts en santé mentale et dépendance pour nous assurer que le public est sensibilisé aux graves dangers pour la santé de la consommation de drogue à des fins récréatives. And we will act decisively to undermine organized crime and the illicit cannabis market. We released details of a two-phase regulatory approach that ensures these public trusts are protected following the federal legalization of cannabis. Starting on October 17th, Ontario will move to an online-only cannabis retail model run by the Ontario Cannabis Store, or OCS. This would be followed by a licensed private retail system for cannabis that will commence on April 1st. The implementation of this two-phased approach will require the introduction of new legislation and a series of legislative and regulatory changes to the current Cannabis Act that was passed by the previous government, along with amendments to other pieces of legislation. Today, Minister Fedeli and I are pleased to share that proposed legislation will be introduced tomorrow. If passed, the legislation will provide additional certainty and stability about the specific regulatory framework that will follow the federal government's October 17th legalization date. First, if passed, our legislation will introduce a robust licensing framework that will be overseen by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, the AGCO. This licensing framework would not be capped and would be driven by a formal application process administered by the AGCO. Ce cadre de délivrance de licence ne sera pas plafonné et reposerait sur un processus formel de demande de licence administré par la CAGO. Potential cannabis store operators would be required to apply for both a retail operator license in addition to a retail store authorization for each location they want to operate. Les personnes souhaitant exploiter un magasin de vente au détail de cannabis auraient à présenter une demande de licence d'exploitation pour vente au détail et une demande de licence de gérant de magasin de vente au détail pour chaque magasin qu'elles souhaiteraient exploiter. The legislation, if passed, would also include regulation-making authority to set concentration limits for how many retail store licenses a single operator can hold. And we will have more to say on this in the days and weeks ahead. And in particular, the legislation would limit the ability of federally licensed producers to own and operate retail locations. Any licensed producer will be permitted to hold a single retail license at a single production site located in Ontario. The legislation, if passed, would also enable the province to set a distance buffer between cannabis retail locations and schools. Si le projet de loi était adopté, la loi autoriserait aussi la province à prescrire une distance minimale entre le lieu d'un magasin de vente de cannabis et des écoles. The AGCO would also be required to issue a public notice upon receipt of any retail authorization application with a 15-day period to receive public and municipal input about a particular store location. La CAGO serait aussi requis de donner un avis public de toute demande de licence prévoyant une période d'au moins 15 jours pour recevoir les commentaires du public sur le lieu pressenti pour l'ouverture d'un magasin donné. As we shared last month, municipalities would have a one-time window to opt out of permitting physical cannabis retail within their municipal boundaries. The deadline for such opt-outs would be January 22nd, which is 3 months after the municipal elections. The legislation would also ensure that First Nations communities are provided with an opportunity to prohibit cannabis retail within their communities. La loi proposée permettrait aux Premières Nations de refuser la délivrance d'autorisations de magasins de vente au détail ou d'interdire l'ouverture de magasins de vente au détail privés. I want to highlight that the AGCO's deep experience as an alcohol and gaming regulator makes it perfectly suited to be the province's cannabis retail regulatory authority as well. J'aimerais souligner que grâce à sa riche expérience en tant qu'organe de réglementation du secteur des jeux et des alcools, la CAJO serait l'organisme parfait pour servir également d'autorité de réglementation du cannabis. AGCO staff possess a deep understanding of compliance enforcement in sectors that share the similar risks as what we expect from the cannabis market. In addition, our legislation would, if passed, modify rules around public consumption of cannabis to align with the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. This would include amending the Smoke-Free Ontario Act 2017 to prohibit smoking and vaping of cannabis in areas where the smoking of tobacco is also prohibited, such as enclosed public places and enclosed workplaces. In addition, the legislation would prohibit the consumption of cannabis in vehicles and boats that are being driven or under a person's care or control, recognizing that in these circumstances, cannabis poses risks similar to alcohol. I would now like to turn the floor over to Minister Fedeli.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Mulroney. There are a couple of final points that Ontarians can expect of the cannabis retail system should the legislature pass our bill. First, I would add that as part of the new AGCO regulatory framework shared by the Attorney General, contravening the province's cannabis licensing or control regimes will bar an applicant from ever receiving a license in the future. Zero tolerance means just that. Zero tolerance. Any engagement with organized crime, any record of providing youth cannabis, any of that would bar you from participating in the private cannabis market. To be clear, if you are still operating an illegal retail operation after October 17th, you would not be able to get a license in Ontario. If passed, our legislation would also change the governance of the Ontario Cannabis Store to reflect its new role as an online retailer and exclusive wholesaler to the private retail marketplace. As part of these changes, the OCS will be known as the Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation, or OCRC. The OCRC would cease to operate as a subsidiary of the LCBO. It would instead operate with a completely separate board and senior management structure that will report directly to the Minister of Finance. The OCRC would serve two important functions following the expansion to private retail on April 1st. First, it would remain the exclusive online retailer for recreational cannabis. Secondly, it would serve as the exclusive wholesaler for private retail cannabis. If passed, the legislation would clarify the governance structure of the Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation. Now, back in August, we confirmed that we would provide $40 million in funding over 2 years to all municipalities to help with the cost of legalization, with each municipality receiving at least $10,000 in total. and that remains. We also noted that we would consider how the funding would be allocated, and we will have more to say on that in the future. The rules and processes around the licensing and regulation of private cannabis retail and the regulations around how we will protect public health as it relates to the public consumption of cannabis will provide certainty to the marketplace. They will also provide peace of mind to parents and families that when it comes to public health, public safety, and protecting youth, our government will never compromise on our commitment to you. Thank you, and Caroline and I will be happy to take your questions.
Okay, questions at the mic, please.
Hi, Minister. Travis Janrush from Global News. There are a lot of, this is for Minister Fedeli, there are a lot of dispensaries that are operating right now illegally. Are you essentially putting them on notice to say, if you don't shut down by this certain date and apply for a legal license, we're going to come in and shut you down?
Well, I think we were pretty clear in August, and we're quite blunt today. We will not be doing business with people who are selling illegal products.
So they're supposed to shut down and then apply and then reopen?
Well, they should be shut down today. They're illegal. But I can tell you that on October 17th, the tools that we announced extend to the municipalities. It's a Provincial Offences Act, and you can be charged up to $250,000 for dispensing illegal cannabis. And the owner of the building, the landlord, if knowingly has a retailer, they too can be fined up to $250,000 for this activity, this illegal activity. And if you're a private corporation that owns that building, you can be charged up to $1 million.
So if they're operating right now illegally as a dispensary, will they be banned from having a license?
No, not necessarily. They shouldn't be in business today. We were very clear in August when we made our announcement that people who were in the market illegally should stop. As of October 17th, recreational cannabis is legal in Ontario, and we announced today a process by which people who wish to participate in the retail market can apply to the AGCO for a retail operator license and a retail store authorization.
If you are operating an illegal cannabis store after October 17th, you will not be able to get a license in Ontario.
In fact, last week, the Customs and Border Protection Agency in the United States issued an advisory that anyone who facilitates the distribution of marijuana when it's legal in Canada could be deemed inadmissible when they cross into the United States. So you are going to be running one of the biggest marijuana distribution agencies in the entire world. So I asked them what would happen if you tried to cross the border or if Mr. Ford tried to cross the border. And they said that the decision on your admissibility would be made by an individual agent, CBP agent. Does that worry you? And also, should anyone considering getting into this business, investing in it, using it, be cautious that they may not be allowed into America?
Well, on October 17th, recreational cannabis is legal in Canada, and so this is an issue that we hear more and more about, and so it's something we'll be discussing at the federal level, and it could be an issue going forward, but we don't have any clarity on it now. But it is legal in Canada.
But the Americans could bar you. I mean, they could say to you, "I'm sorry, Ms. Mulroney, you can't come across the border." Is that a problem? And well, should people be cautious when they're thinking of investing or participating in this market?
I think that people should be cautious whenever making investment decisions, but I think that in the case of crossing the border, this is something that we'll have to take up at the federal level, and because it affects not just Ontario, it affects people across the country. Thank you.
Hi there, Marika Walsh, iPolitics. 2 questions for you, hopefully fast ones. First of all, will there be a limit or a ratio, either per capita or per square mile, for how many stores you'll allow in a specific municipality? And are you worried that the opt-out deadline is too close to the time when councils get sworn in, so they won't have enough time to go over this and make a decision? They get sworn in December.
Well, certainly there are many decisions that will be done in regulation. We're continuing to consult with municipalities, First Nations, public health providers, law enforcement. And so we give ourselves the flexibility in the legislation, and much of the final numbers will be in regulation. As to your question about the timeline, I can tell you that we have been circulating the province, consulting widely. My own consultations in my community of North Bay, we invited all elected officials, all people running for councils, mayor and council, in the 11 communities I serve. We invited public health officials, law enforcement, both OPP and local agencies, so that everybody, since our first announcement in August, has been widely aware of the deadlines coming up in January. So there's considerable time for the new councils to make their decisions.
Hi, Richard with 680 News. Just a clarification on licensed producers. Did you indicate they're only going to be allowed to open one retail location? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. Licensed producers will be able to open one retail location.
All right. Beyond that, if I have a store that's selling, pop and chips, will I be able to, if I would have been granted a license, be able to sell cannabis along with it, or will I need a standalone store to do that?
The AGCO will be issuing retail operator license and store authorization licenses for independent bricks and mortar stores.
So that's yes?
Yes.
Antonella Artuso, Toronto Sun. Some groups have raised concerns about people growing marijuana in their homes, landlords, insurance companies, banks. Does your legislation address this issue? Have you made final decisions on how much marijuana someone can grow on their property?
Well, the federal legislation says up to 4 plants. And so we can build in flexibility into the regulations, but we don't speak to that. We're not banning it outright. I know the concerns, but the federal legislation sets 4 plants per residence, not per person.
What about the concern raised by some people that they don't want to be in homes where next door someone, an apartment next door, someone is using a lot of marijuana?
Well, the federal government is legalizing recreational cannabis, and so it's up to us to provide the retail model for it. I'm sure that there will be a lot of complaints about next door, the neighbor next door, but this is we are aligning with the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, and so if you're able to smoke tobacco in your home, then you'll be able to use cannabis as well.
Hi. I have a question about how much say municipalities will have. You're giving them until January 22nd to opt out if they don't want any of these cannabis stores. Could they themselves ask for a cap? So could Toronto, in theory, say, sure, we'll take cannabis stores, but we only want 40 or 50? Would you give them that right?
Well, we heard through our extensive negotiations with municipalities that they would welcome provincially set guidelines. We did, as we mentioned in our remarks, there's some flexibility towards with respect to a cap going down the road. Right now, we are not proposing a cap, but we will be looking forward to further input from municipalities on this. But within the authorization process that the AGCO will be following, there's a 15-day public notice process, and so that provides an opportunity for local input and municipal input into the location of the store.
Hi, Minister Fedeli. Nick Dixon, CP24. Question for you. Do you have a sense now, 3 weeks out from the legalization, of exactly how much you're expecting the sale of marijuana could bring into the province? And secondly, are you at all concerned about the regulated pricing being above the black market price and therefore limiting the market for provincially legislated or sort of organized marijuana sales?
Well, everything we do centers around making sure that our kids are safe, our roads are safe, and that we're tackling the illegal market, so that all of this is designed with that in mind. So with those as our go-ahead points, we're quite satisfied that, first of all, we'll be ready. All of the data we have today is based on illegal activity. So there are a lot of assumptions, but we'll learn a lot starting October 17th. We believe we have all of the pieces in place to respond to robust activity on October 17th. We're ready. And while other areas begin retail on those days, we'll have that period between October 17th and April 1st to learn from them to be ready for April 1st on our private retail model as well.
You must have some sort of range you're estimating in terms of the revenue this could mean to the province's coffers.
You know, this is really not about the revenue side. We're going to earn money from the federal excise tax and the HST, but this is all about putting a product in the marketplace that is going to be safe from kids, be safe for our roads, but primarily to be able to tackle the illegal market. So it's not about, you know, every budget like a tobacco and alcohol, we're going to raise revenue. This isn't about revenue. This is about tackling the illegal market and safety. Very different.
Hi there, CBC News. So people who want to open a private retail location, but they have a past criminal conviction over cannabis possession, will they be able to do that? And could you answer in both English and French?
Yes, that will not bar them from participating in the marketplace. On October 17th, they should not be operating illegal storefronts, and they'll need to make an application to the AGCO and undergo the strict due diligence process that's in place at the AGCO. We want people who participate to do so with integrity, honesty, and in the public interest, and that's what the AGCO's mandate will be with respect to that. Alors, s'ils ont eu une conviction dans le passé, ils pourront toujours participer dans le marché de détail privé, mais ils devront faire une application formelle avec la CAJO.
Hi there. Do you have an updated list of how many municipalities have already decided to opt out, and which ones are they?
Well, the opt-out decision doesn't come until January 22nd of 2019.
Have
That's
any,
the first
have any given signaled at all that they wish to opt out? Some have said publicly, but have you guys been given a list?
The only one that has written to me formally happens to be my own city of North Bay that opted in, and I did not ask for that.
Also, on October 17th, there are a lot of people who are going to be excited to probably partake in cannabis for the first time. In Ontario, though, they may not actually be able to get their hands on cannabis on that date. Is there going to be any process to pre-order your pot so it can arrive on the 17th of October? I'm asking for a friend.
Somebody's awful anxious. Does the friend have the same initials? On October 17th is the first date that we will be able to have any kind of transactions for legal recreational cannabis.
Hi, I'm with CBC News, so if you can answer in both English and French, that would be great. My question is, you mentioned that Ontario is going to be the exclusive supplier to retail chains. Does this mean that retail chains are not going to be able to sell pot grown elsewhere or that they grow themselves?
The OCS is the exclusive distributor for marijuana in Ontario. Alors, l'OCS demeure toujours le seul distributeur du cannabis en Ontario.
But there are stores that can open and apply for a license and grow kind of their.
Yes, the licensed producer is able to apply for a single retail operator license.
Last question.
Hi, Rob Ferguson, Toronto Star. Just a little clarification on the fact that you said there's no cap. There's not a cap envisioned at this point, but you also mentioned that you would be able to set concentration limits. So as I understand that, that would be a limit on, one company getting, limiting the number of licenses one company could get. So what do you envision for that in terms of detail? Do you want to keep it down to a certain percentage of market share? How will that work?
Well, we want to make sure, again, that the consumers are protected, but we want to open up the marketplace. We want to have, this is an opportunity for small business to get involved. So we want to have as many participants as possible be involved. So there will be an opportunity. Again, the legislation provides the flexibility to put a cap in through regulation. But we do want to see as many participants right across Ontario get involved.
So did you have a figure in mind, like you don't want anyone to get more than 5% or 10% or 20%?
There's no number today in the legislation. It gives us the flexibility to set a number going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Oh.
When you say that existing stores can get a permit, do you mean like a Shoppers Drug Mart, a Max, a corner store can all get permits to sell cannabis as well?
These are all standalone bricks and mortar facilities that will have a common look and feel. You can't enter if you're under the age of 19. You won't be able to see inside. This is all about the safety of our youth, the safety on our roads, and tackling the illegal marketplace.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.